Welcome to Cooking with Benson. Just a side note real quick, you're gonna hear the baby talking. She's sitting in her exercise saucer or playing with her toys and stuff, and she's very, very vocal today. So just bear with me as that's there. But we're gonna do a top tips for cooking. I've got 7 tips to kind of help you become a better cook or to really kind of start that journey. I swear she wasn't this loud like 10 minutes ago. She's so funny. Okay, so our 7 tips for cooking. So the number 1 tip you're gonna have, it's called mise en place or mise en place. It's a French term that means everything in its place, putting everything in its place. Basically, before you start a recipe, pre-cut all your ingredients, have your ingredients measured out in bowls so it's good to go. Because the thing is as you're cooking, sometimes things are gonna be to a certain point where it's like, okay, this needs to cook for this long, and sure, you've got 5 minutes. But if you are over here chopping these vegetables and this should be simmering for 5 minutes and you take too long, then you run the risk of burning this. So you wanna make sure like all your vegetables, all your ingredients, if you're using canned goods, your cans are already opened and drained if they need to be drained. And on top of that, that your vegetables and everything are cut up into bowls and separated out at the exact measurements that you need for your recipe. So mise en place, basically everything in its place. Number 2, proper tool care. So basically you want to make sure your knives are clean and sharp. When it comes to knives, make sure you're not soaking them in water. As you use them, clean them and put them on their drying rack so they're ready to go. Make sure you're sharpening them regularly, keeping the blades and everything from being like damaged and chipped. You know, make sure you're not using your chef's knife to cut through bone or solid frozen meats and things like that. Also, your pots and pans, you know, you don't want to like cook in them and let them sit overnight with food or anything in them. You want to cook, clean them, put them on the shelves to dry, wipe them out, especially if you're big into using cast iron and stuff like that. The only thing you can really leave just sitting in cast iron is like, let's say you fry bacon in cast iron and none of it sticks to the bottom. You can leave the bacon grease sitting in your cast iron because that's going to season your cast iron. Also make sure like once a month you're oiling down your cast iron and putting in the oven to help kind of add and build layers to the cast iron seasoning. And if you have non-stick pans, you know, make sure you're not using metal objects in your non-stick pans to scratch them. Make sure you're not overheating your pans. Cast iron pans are really the only thing that can take an overheating and not have anything happen to them because they're so heavy. But a lot of these non-stick pans are made out of like an aluminum material or other types of metals and alloys, and if you overheat them, they start to warp. So if you've ever had a pot that when you set on the stove it wobbled, it's probably because that pot got overheated. And what I mean by overheating is if you take a pot, put it on the stove and turn it on, and then don't come back to it for 5 or 10 minutes because you're out cutting vegetables or you're getting stuff out of the pantry or something like that, that pot's overheating, and at that point it's just absorbing the heat and that's causing the metal to flex. Whereas like if you're throwing in vegetables and stuff, you're constantly mitigating that high temperature with cold ingredients. Or if you've got a pot full of soup and it's just sitting there at a rolling boil, those ingredients are mitigating that heat so the metals aren't warping as bad. So when I say don't overheat your pot, basically don't put a pan on the stove, turn it on and let it sit there for more than a minute or two so that it's not warping the pan. Cast iron you can let sit there and get good and hot because it's such a heavy metal that it's not going to warp the way other pans do, especially non-stick stuff. So number 2, make sure you take care of your tools, and that's your knives, your utensils, and your pots and pans. Number 3, don't be afraid to try new foods. So it seems like a weird one to contribute to a cooking tip, but it really isn't, in the sense that you can't expand your palate without trying new things. If you only ever taste the exact same thing you cook, you're only going to cook that exact same thing. And the reason being is you don't know what new flavors are. So sit down and try different herbs, try different seasonings, try different salts, peppers, and things like that. Expand your palate. You know, if the only thing you ever eat is a Popeye's fried chicken leg, that's the only thing you're ever going to cook is a Popeye fried chicken leg, because you're not going to understand the taste palette of, say, a taco or a pizza. You're only going to understand that taste of a fried chicken leg and how to cook that fried chicken leg. But if you taste a taco, then you can turn around and taste different herbs to find out what spices and seasonings are in that taco to know how to make it. Versus, I mean, you're looking at recipes and stuff like that. But so what I'm saying though is, try new things, try different foods from different cultures. Don't just, I remember growing up, the only thing we ever ate was like Southern food, and it's like baked chicken and hams and stuff like that. Like, I didn't really get to expand my palate until I was like 18 and old enough to go decide where I wanted to eat, because my family was so like We don't want to try anything new. Everything new is bad. We're only going to eat what we grew up eating. We're only going to eat what we were taught to cook. And there's so much more out there. So be willing to expand your horizon beyond what your every day-to-day is. If a new restaurant opens up in town, go try them. If you don't like it, that's fine. You don't like it, but there's a chance you're going to find something on that menu that you do like, and that's going to expand your horizon. And especially if it's a place, let's say you've never had Thai food and a new Thai place opens up, you may realize you like Thai food. You know, you may realize you like Greek food, or different cultures have such amazing things to contribute to the culinary world. Like, expand your horizon by trying new things. Number 4, this kind of goes along with number 1, the mise en place, but I call it the garbage bowl. And you can have 2. You can have a paper garbage bowl and you can have a scraps garbage bowl. And what I mean by that is, when you're cooking or prepping things, make sure you have a bowl that's a trash bowl and you have a bowl that's like a scraps bowl. So like, let's say you're cutting an onion, you want to have a bowl to throw your skins in, your roots in. Anything you don't cut or you're not going to use from that onion can go in there. Celery leaves, pepper ends, bell pepper seeds, and things like that can go in this, we'll call it the biodegradable bowl. And then let's say any wrappers or stuff from like cheese or meats or anything can go in this bowl. That way you're not having to go back and forth to the trash can or whatever. And on top of that, if you ever decide to get into doing like compost piles and stuff, which is good for like planting vegetables and stuff, which we'll get to later, this biodegradable bowl can go in a compost pile, so that it's not just being wasted and thrown in the trash. It's actually being turned into a fertilizer. So have 1 or 2 bowls. If you're going to do a compost pile, have 2 bowls. If you're not, you can have 1 bowl. It's like a trash bowl that you can throw stuff in, and you're not constantly having to look for the trash can or keeping the trash can close to where you're cooking and stuff. So number 5, farmers markets. Find them, talk to the locals about their products, talk to the farmers that are there, ask them how they cook their vegetables. Like me, I had never had a turnip before, but we were at a farmer's market recently, and this farmer was selling turnips, and I asked him, I was like, how do you cook these? Like, I've never had one. What's the best way that you know how to cook? And he's like, well, my wife does this, this, and this. I bought them right then and there because they weren't overly expensive, and I brought them home and I cooked them that way, and I tried them and I enjoyed them. But on top of that, it gave me an idea of how to eat them a different way. So like, his wife was like, oh, you know, you slice them real thin and you can fry them or bake them and eat them that way. I brought them home, did the exact same thing, enjoyed them. So the next time I put a pot roast in the crock pot, I peeled them and chopped them up and threw them in the crock pot, and they were just like having a potato, but they weren't a starchy white potato. They were turnips. So that's what I mean when I say go to farmers markets, because A, you're gonna get better quality foods there. Like the same guy I bought tomatoes from, and they're the best, sweetest tomatoes I've ever had in my life. They're beautiful, they're a beautiful red color, they're very fresh tasting, they're vibrant, the flavors just kind of pop in your mouth, versus like something I'm gonna get from a chain grocery store where they've probably been picked way too early, and they don't have a good flavor profile to them. Farmers markets are your friend. You're probably going to spend a little bit more money. Be willing to spend a little bit more money on those fresh ingredients from farmers markets, because A, you're supporting somebody local, and B, you're getting an ingredient that person knows exactly what went into it before it gets to you, whereas he's not selling it to a manufacturer and they're coating it whatever chemicals they need to before it gets to you so that it lasts longer. So farmers markets are a big thing. You can find meat at farmers markets where people are selling like fresh organic meats and stuff like that, but the biggest thing for me is finding a farmers market for the fresh vegetables, fresh herbs, and things like that. So number 6, I would say, is eventually, once you're getting into this situation where you're cooking, you're going to want to learn to grow your own herbs and vegetables. Herbs like basil and thyme and rosemary, they can actually be grown inside your house. So if you live in an apartment, they can be grown in little pots around your house. And I would say all you need to do is make sure you water them daily, and then take them outside for a little bit of sun every evening, so that they're not getting burned up by the Florida sun. So like Florida especially, I don't want to leave a basil plant outside all day because the heat will just destroy it. But what I'll do is maybe take it out for an hour in the evening between like 5 and 6, where it's getting some sunshine, but it's not getting a direct beam of sunshine to destroy it. Or I'll leave it in a windowsill where it'll get a couple hours, but the window kind of helps protect it. So herbs like that can be grown inside, and then some herbs will even last it. I have a rosemary bush that's out front of my porch that's been there for 2 or 3 years now, and it's growing all fine, and it's not bothered by the heat. I just make sure I water it whenever there's dry periods. The other thing is vegetables. You can start small, you know, tomatoes and cucumbers and beans and squash. Those will grow in a 5-gallon bucket on your porch. So, or if you have a patio or whatever, or if you've got a small plot of land, just get you a shovel, dig up a 5-foot by 5-foot area, toss the dirt around, get the weeds and stuff out, aerate that part of the soil. And then at those farmers markets, you can probably find, you know, already started cabbage plants or squash plants, and you can just plant those in that little area. Make sure you water it daily. Make sure it's in an area where it's not getting direct sunlight all day long so the plants burn up, and start small. You know, that way you know, okay, I've got 8 cabbages or 10 cabbages that I know where those cabbages came from, what's been put on them, what ground they've grown from. I'm not getting a cabbage from who knows where, or what kind of pesticides or chemicals have been used to preserve that cabbage for by the time it gets to me. So learning and understanding how things grow and learning and understanding what makes them grow will also give you a better idea of what goes into their taste palette and what goes into making them an ingredient that goes with something else. You know, I know that sounds weird. I know understanding how something grows and how something nourishes shouldn't really tell you how it's going to taste or how it's going to interact with other ingredients, but it really does. So cabbages, for instance, they grow above the ground, they're constantly getting rain and sunshine, so they're going to be a little bit lighter and crispier and airier, whereas like a carrot grows under the ground, so it's going to be a little bit darker, it's going to be a little bit sweeter, it's going to be a little bit tougher because it's constantly having the earth packed around it and it's not getting as much sunshine. Same thing with potatoes. So, okay, I know if I take that carrot that's a little bit tougher, a little bit crispier, and I mix it with that cabbage, which is lighter, it's a little bit more brighter flavor, then these two flavors are going to complement each other because it's a light and a dark flavor, or a bright and a dark flavor, and a light versus a heavy flavor. You know what I'm saying? Like, understanding those things will really kind of accentuate how you learn to cook. So it's not something you have to be like, oh, 30 acres and I'm growing an entire farm. Start small, buckets, planters, things like that. Plus having fresh herbs on hand whenever you want them. I'm telling you, dried basil's great, basil flakes, whatever you have in your spice cabinet's amazing, but to be able to take a tomato, a piece of mozzarella, and pair it with a piece of fresh basil, absolutely taste bud exploding there. It's such a big difference having that fresh herb to like add to the finishing touch of a dish. It's amazing. The last tip, the 7th tip, 7 tips for cooking, is talk to other people who love to cook. Learn from their experiences, especially talk to people outside of your normal circle. I love my grandmother. I love talking to my grandmother about cooking, but I know how she cooks. I know what she likes to cook, and I know her palate. I'm never going to learn more than that from her. So I'll randomly talk to food truck drivers about the things they're cooking and any tips they have, or farmers markets, and I'll find these people who have, you know, baked goods that they're selling at farmers market and ask what their tips and tricks are. Or if I go to like my local Asian market and I'm shopping for different goods there, I'll talk to the cashiers or the people behind the counters and ask them what their favorite recipe is, and I take that and I bring it home. I try those recipes out the way they tell me. If I enjoy them, I keep them that way. Or if it's something, let's say, okay, it was a really delicious recipe, but something in there didn't sit well in my palate and I know what it is, I'll tweak it so that it sits well with my palate. You know, I know, for instance, like my daughter can't stand cilantro. She has that taste bud situation where cilantro tastes like soap to her. Me and my wife love cilantro. But because I know that, I'm not going to keep cooking tacos with cilantro. I'm not going to keep cooking or making salsa with cilantro because I know it's bad for her flavor palette. So I'll change that. Even though I got that salsa recipe from, you know, the local Spanish market, I'll change it so that it sits well with our taste buds, so that my kids are trying something new in a certain scenario. You know what I'm saying? So like, talk to people outside your normal scenario, find out their favorite recipes, try their recipes, and kind of go from there, and then make them your own. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you can take, you know, I can take and make an Indian dish inspired taco, or I can make a Mexican inspired curry dish. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many ways, like, once you learn to kind of take all these steps and kind of jam them together into your ability to cook, then you can turn around and make recipes that commingle all these different flavors, and you'll understand, because you've taken these steps, you've learned these steps, you'll understand how to make that happen. So that's my 7 tips for cooking, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll see you in the kitchen.